Welcome to our first podcast. Actually, it's our take 2 of our first podcast. I'm Serge Boudreau, and I'm here with Yves Boudreau. I don't think the audience cares who we are, but I still think we should give a brief introduction. So, Yves, who are you?
Well, name's Yves Boudreau, serial entrepreneur. And right now the CEO of CareerBeacon, and alongside, but similar, essentially the same company. And been doing this my whole life. I've only been employed for about 5 years of my 20 plus years in the professional sector. Other than that, it's always I've signed my own checks for the majority of my professional life. And
yeah, when you say no one, you've never worked for anyone, or you only work for someone for 5 years, is it because no one would ever hire you?
Oh yeah, I've come to the conclusion, and my wife will say the same thing now, is that I am unemployable. So I think even my mom now believes that as well. So at one point, she always thought I'd be great, a great artist or designer, which I've dabbled in, but now I think she knows I'm unemployable. So that's why I do what I do, because no one will hire me.
Well, isn't that the case with most entrepreneurs? They're not hireable, so they start their own business.
I think so. I mean, there's definitely a rebel element to it. I think, I didn't set out to do my own thing my whole life. I didn't know, especially after I failed miserably with my first company, I never really thought I'd go back at it. So I don't know. I think everyone has different fabrics that kind of bring them to where they are in life, and some people, it takes them to the entrepreneurship route. Others, very happy working a job and supporting their family and still doing something they're passionate about if they're lucky. So I feel very, very fortunate. I don't have a lot. I've gone gray much quicker than expected, and as you can see, my hair is not as full as it used to be. But I still love all of it. I still love everything that came, the good, the bad, the ugly.
For the listeners, I'm Serge Boudreau. I also work at CareerBeacon. I'm the vice president of BD. I also have a very popular podcast called A Recruitment Flex. This whole podcast, Yves, is really talking about this industry when we talk about hiring. We're going to tell real stories that happen in the real world, even when we have screwed up in the past or when we hear of screw ups. But we're also going to share some really some inspiring stories of how companies have done it really well. And hopefully you get some insights from it. So, Yves, I think the most interesting story that we can have on our first episode is your journey in scaling and hiring in multiple companies, right? You started alongside when?
I mean, the planning, kind of building part of it, probably 2012. And it was mostly Ben and myself working off hours, sometimes on Sundays, Wednesday. We actually rented we were pretty committed. We actually rented a boardroom every Wednesday in town to meet up after work for a few hours and continue the work, continue, the next steps. But we did it while we were both fully employed for almost a year until we made the full jump. But even before, alongside, this is my second company. So I started my first company when I was 19. It was called Halation Studios, which was a terrible name.
And what does that even mean?
Halation is actually a light that you can only see through a camera lens.
Okay, there you go.
So it's actually come up a few times since then, and I think there's actually other brands that kind of use it now. But at the time, we were just so advanced, ahead of our time. But yeah, the whole concept of Halation was that we saw certain things that our regular customers maybe didn't see. So it was a terrible name. And my first company, everyone that I hired was friends I went to college with.
Yeah.
So
that's interesting, right? Because that's I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, and that's the story. Their first company is someone they met in college or someone they met at their first job, and they just start a company. So at what point did you meet Ben, your co-founder of Alongside? Obviously after this, did you meet him at your first company or?
Yeah, Yeah, not working together like in the same company, but we were really good at design and like front end, and he was working at another development company that was more tailored to the back end, and so we did a
Mhm.
lot of collaborative projects together. I didn't know him that much. Like we didn't like we hung out a few times here and there, like when we'd meet up for meetings. But I always had such a respect for how much shit he took, essentially, because he would like clients would want changes at the last minute, like things weren't working, especially in the early, like this is like the early 2000s. Tech is still not really where it needs to be, and Ben was just like, cool as you cucumber the whole way through,
That
and
hasn't changed.
that
It's
hasn't
still
changed at all. So,
cool.
and it always like stuck with me. And so I never really like when I decided to start alongside, I was looking for a technical co-founder, and even though I don't think I had talked to Ben for years at that point in time, and I just like reached out to Ben. I was like, "Hey, what are you up to?" And he's like working at a company and as one of their developers. And I was like, "Do you want to start a business with me?" And he said yes right away, and he quit his job. And no, he wasn't like that. It took I think it took like 6 months for him to make the jump. Um,
Mm,
he wanted to wait till we were at a point where he felt really good about the idea, the concept before, because he was, he had family and security, and so, but yeah, like so that's how I met Ben, like through work before. But it's funny sometimes, like you just meet people, and even though I didn't really hang out with Ben, I just knew he had great work ethics, and so for
yeah.
me, I was just like, and I needed someone who was the opposite of me, so which I think you could confirm.
I'll confirm complete opposites. And it makes me wonder because I've always thought, like, hey, if I start a business, how would I recruit a co-founder and potentially a technical co-founder? Like, how would you recruit a technical or a co-founder for an entrepreneur? How do you approach that?
I mean, I think it's tough. Like I mentor a few companies, and that's always been the challenge. Like you got to be out there, you got to meet people, like you got
Mm,
to you got to find ways to pay attention. Pay attention, like when if you're working at a company, pay attention to your colleagues. They could be your
yeah.
next future co-founder. But yeah, for me, I was just lucky. Like I just kind of like, and it was weird because Ben always stood out for me as like, okay, like I only met a few people like Ben in my life that I'm just like, I would absolutely go to war with those
Yeah.
individuals, right? They're just wired differently. But I don't think there's any like, there's all kinds of stuff out there. There's like co-founder dating things in the Valley, and there's
Oh,
like,
is there really?
yeah, there's like they used to do events where like speed dating, where like you could go
Okay.
to these networking events to try to find a co-founder for your business. So sometimes it would be someone super technical that you would need someone with a business background, and vice versa. So I've just been really fortunate that yeah, I've had some really work with some really great people over the years that yeah. I don't know
You
if
know,
I
I
don't know if Ben, I don't know if Ben would say the same thing about from his perspective if he was on this show.
oh, probably not. He'd be like, "What the hell did I do? Like, I wasted 10 years of my life now." I've never had a co-founder, but I had a similar experience when I started a podcast and needed a partner for the podcast. And it's when you're looking at it, it's like, who is the opposite of who you are, but has the skills that you need. And that's how I got to Shelly. Like I've known Shelly for a long time, but I never worked with her. I like either been a client, but I knew exactly her work ethic, but I knew her knowledge, which
Mhm.
was just a big driving factor. And I knew that I would get along with them because a startup or anything that you're starting from scratch, there's going to be a lot of hard times, right?
Yeah.
And if your co-founder is not aligned, you're not friendly with them, and if you don't like them, things can go sideways pretty quickly. I would imagine there's horror stories out there, especially like in Silicon Valley, of like co-founders just like going their separate ways and it being nasty.
Yeah, I think I spent a lot of time researching when like I spent a year and a half figuring out like how if like I didn't want to do the same mistakes with my first company, which really
Yeah.
did result in my own personal bankruptcy for me. There were some good things about it. There's things that I obviously carried over, but I didn't want to like just repeat the same mistakes. And so there's some things that I also talked to, like, one of my biggest strengths is I build networks like crazy, like connections, like, and I leverage people that have done it before, like, just to understand how they did it, what they did differently. One of the big, sounds like trivial, but one of the big things that sometimes co-founders do is money becomes like a reason for, especially when things are difficult or by any real situation. But Ben and I made it right away. Like, we agree that we would always pay each other the same salary. So so it would never be a question of like one is more valuable than the other, or so, like, it's been, and I hear stories afterwards of co-founders who haven't done that, and then this jealousy that gets, starts to creep in, and because how do you really measure the effort of one person versus the other? And so while Ben doesn't have the CEO title, like, he's does a lot of CEO type functions with the company. So that right away, but we've been through so much that, like it would, honestly, I don't know how many co-founders would have gone through the things we've gone through if they hadn't had a good starting point in their agreements in the early days.
I agree. How about we jump to your first hire at Alongside? First of all, like, what did you know about hiring during that time? It was still early in your career. Who was that first hire? And let's talk about what your process was back then.
Process. I mean, I've always had, I've been pretty good at reading people in general. So, like, I usually, like...
Have you?
I used to be. We'll see. I don't know. We'll see where this conversation...
No, I'm not questioning, because I hear this from CEOs a lot, right? And some are right, some are not. Some people inflate what the skill of actually knowing how people are. So I'm not questioning you at all. I'm just curious as it goes. I guess time will tell.
Yeah, you can question me. It's okay. I'm a big boy. I can take it. No, I used to, even like when I started my first company, even the friends that I hired, it's funny because, like, RJ is like essentially one of my best friends now. He was my best man at my wedding. I was his best man at his wedding. But in college, like, we didn't talk to each other. He was like a skater guy. I was like a metal goth, like, dressed in black every day. We were just in two separate crowds, and, like, nothing in common. But we were always the last guys in the computer rooms, like, at night. Like, school would be done, college would be done, everyone would go home, and we're still, like, learning how to use the tools. We're still learning how to code, how to design, like, and I just, similar to Ben, I just remembered, like, when I started the company, I just remembered, like, oh, I got to talk to RJ because he's got, like, incredible work ethics, and, like, I want to have someone like that on my team. So, and it turned out to be, he's still an amazing person today, like, in the where he's at work, and pretty much everyone that I've hired that day have turned out to be all super talented individuals in their own careers today. But with this company, I didn't want to hire friends, if that makes any sense. Like, I didn't want to hire, because the downside of hiring friends is that when things get difficult, you don't want to have some of the conversations you need to have. And while I knew Ben, we didn't hang out. So it was like, there was still kind of like some separation there. But that was the first time, like, that was the first time I was hiring someone completely new that I didn't have any. So my first hire was also someone I'd never met before. But it was the same thing. I was at a workshop for an accelerator, and the guy, Aaron, the guy running the workshop, I was really impressed with him. Like, he was, like, really articulate. He was very organized, and he was also very knowledgeable in the content he was talking about. And I literally talked to him after the workshop that he was facilitating. I said, "Hey, do you want to grab coffee?" We talked it out, and I was like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, just looking for opportunities, doing some contract work here and there. I was like, "Do you want to work with us? We don't have a ton of money to pay you, but we're starting a company from the ground up." And we don't know exactly what your role is going to be yet. It's probably going to be a little bit of everything, and then but we'll figure it out. That was literally the interview. So yeah, so he was our first hire. He was with us for 5 years, over 5 years, and he started off as literally a jack of all trades, but he had natural. He was really good with customers. He was really good at understanding technology with real world problems. Very passionate about the pain points we were trying to solve. There wasn't really any, like, I don't even know where he went. I couldn't tell you today where he went to school still or anything like that. I don't even remember if he ever even gave me a resume.
Have you ever seen a resume?
Oh yeah. Have
At least
you?
once? Have you hired someone with a resume? Like, this is going to. It looks like you're just like picking people off the street here.
I will tell you that I don't know where most people on the team have gone to school. If that
Yeah.
makes.
Well, that shows the importance of that right now, and we're seeing that even way more. That dropping degree requirements, like no one cares where you went to school, especially not 20 years after, right?
It also depends on what you do. Like
Yeah,
I'm hoping that my heart surgeon will have gone to school.
yeah. My
Um,
pilot too.
yeah, your pilot.
Oh no, yes, I
Um,
agree with that. Yes.
yeah, no, I vividly remember the first five people that we, Mike who's our longest standing team member now outside of Ben and I, celebrated 10 years with us. He again, same work ethic, same thing. Just like
How
I
did you
didn't
find
know him.
Mike?
We hired him as a contractor originally to do some. He came recommended from a common connection, and we hired him as a contractor. And the story with Mike is crazy, but I won't get into it too much. But it actually, he was about to take an offer from someone else,
Hmm.
and then I didn't know, and then he got a message he wasn't supposed to get. So anyway, it was a little crazy, but ended up working out serendipitously. It was like really a really good situation because I was like, hey, if you're about to take an offer from someone else, we need to talk before you do that. And then and the offer that he was getting from the other company was way better than what we were giving him. But we couldn't. We had to figure but what was important for him, he had young kids. He wanted flexibility with home, to be able to, take care of his family, vacation time, those types of things. So we worked it out with him to give him things that financially we couldn't give him, but we're like, look, do what you need to do as run your life while you're doing the work. Like, it's fine.
Well, and I think that's the perfect example of like when you're competing with big brands or competing with anyone, you got to figure out what the key things for that candidate. And if flexibility is like for a company your size to get top talent, you're not competing in pay, you're not competing in stock options, you're not competing with a ton of things, but flexibility is the one thing that you saw. Hey, this is how we can get this candidate. There's other things too, right? Like this is where being honest and transparent, especially if you're, in my opinion, if you're a small startup and you need high level employees, like build like an incredible value proposition. Be like, hey, you can work anytime. We're flexible anytime, anywhere. Just get the work done. That type of arrangement. You've done that. Like I've seen you do that across the board, even building out CareerBeacon. You've been very flexible to get some really impressive talent. Like I think of Ryan. So Ryan moving to Japan, he's our head of product. That flexibility for him and us having the ability to work with us is impressive, right? Like not a lot of companies would do that, but it puts us in a really competitive space because we offer that amount of flexibility. Sorry, I didn't want to derail you, but I
No, it didn't derail me. No,
important.
it didn't derail me. I was thinking about what you were saying, and sometimes you don't realize at that point it sounds trivial, maybe, but yeah, it is. It is, especially now more so than ever. I think like the
Yeah.
flexibility side of it for us is an advantage for us. I also think like I look back at some of the people that we brought in, and I think like a lot of the common denomination was they didn't feel valued where they were before. Like I would say
Yeah.
even Ben, they were contributing highly, performing individuals in their own previous roles, and there was just clear evidence that they were not valued. And so part of the proposition for me was like, there's nowhere other than a startup with 5 people where you're gonna
Yeah.
feel valued and where your voice is going to be heard, where you're going to have influence on where we're going, um, and so I think, looking back, I think that was part of it. And I look for certain traits in the early days that I don't know that I look for as much anymore too. It's like,
Yeah.
so
Like
that's
what?
another part of it as well. Um, like I look for individuals who I could sense had a ton of potential, and sometimes maybe didn't see it in themselves, but I would see it. Like I would see it just in interacting with them. And a lot of times they were able to get there, and it was really, really rewarding to see someone. It's always rewarding to see someone, the growth that they achieved, like to see someone's confidence go up, not only at work, but like in their personal lives like this. I've seen it with many, many people that worked here. It's always like, it's one of my favorite things.
Yeah.
But can also be like difficult, because it's like, it's pouring a lot of energy sometimes into individuals who have the skills, but to get them to really get to that point, like they're not necessarily um, always putting the same level of passion that you sometimes like have for what they're capable of doing, if that makes any
Yeah.
sense. But I think, like, for the most part, like, I definitely look, there's been some bumps in the road, to say the least, in terms of like hiring history, but common denominator, said that twice already, but common denominator for me has always been empathy as well. Like, hired a lot of people who show empathy, because we're in the space of helping humans. Like, we're in the business of like helping people find opportunities, helping employers find opportunities. And so for me, like, we can't do that mission, live by that, and not have people who are empathetic in the organization, who care about the well-being of others. So and I'll say this as an example, as the last one, but like Nora, who was employee number 5, I believe. I remember when we interviewed her, like, she was volunteering and teaching newcomers like English, who were coming to the community. She wasn't getting paid. She was doing it because she wanted to help people who were joining the Moncton community, like, get more comfortable with the English language, and she was doing it on the off hours on her own. And for me, like, I was like, okay, this is a type of, a young person who isn't like still enjoying life, doing the things that young people do,
Yeah.
but also cares about their fellow human beings. So for me, like, those were things that I was looking for.
It's interesting because you mentioned like 6 things that are very fluffy HR terms, like empathy and everything. I now understand that you've been in the HR industry for 10 years. Like, they've softened you up, right? You're even using the terms, but I'm joking. I know that's how you approach it. I've seen it firsthand. But I love that you're getting the HR lingo here. I think that's great.
I was ahead. I was saying those words before HR was saying
Oh,
those
were
words.
you? Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I was pre HR.
well, let's talk about now, today, or maybe let's go back 2 years. So alongside, you had a journey for 5-6 years, then you got the opportunity to acquire CareerBeacon, and that's a whole story in itself. And I think we can have that in a future episode. And then you had 4 employees. Now you had a lot more revenue. You had a lot more risk. You had so many fluctuating that you needed to grow this company really quickly. So you started 4 and you got to 20 employees probably in, what was it, like 5 months, 6 months?
I think it was quicker than that.
Yeah, it seemed like a whirlwind. But anyways, we hired a lot of people. You hired a lot of people. If you had to do it again, what would you have done differently?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the context I would add to that is, like, we were at like, alongside, prior to the acquisition of CareerBeacon, at the largest we had ever been was 14 employees.
Okay.
and that was like peak size, and that was like in 2018, 2019. Without getting into the specifics of it, like things just got really difficult for us as an organization, and we went down to 4 employees at the time of making this acquisition. So, and with the acquisition, we were taking on 6 of the six original employees from CareerBeacon that had been there for a significant amount of time, and on the same, and we were also hiring to fill certain gaps that we knew right away we would need. So I believe that we went from 4 employees from being 4 on a Friday to being 12 on a Monday.
Yeah.
So just and it doesn't sound like, you hear of companies who are, hiring 50, 100 employees at a time, but when you're at that scale, like you're essentially like, multiplying your team, 3-4x, like within, a few weeks. So to answer your question, I think I would have, I have a habit of, just like sometimes like just pulling the trigger and figuring things out later. I think I would try to figure out a few things ahead of time. So it was exciting. We were going from a company revenue wise as well. We were essentially 4xing, 5xing our revenue overnight. Even hiring you, like terrible mistake.
Worst decision you've ever made. You never looked at my resume. That was the problem.
Yeah, exactly. I never looked at your resume, and I didn't check your references. But no, like the example for you, what's that?
Lesson learned.
Lesson learned. Yeah, exactly. I'll never do it again. No, I mean the lesson, not the lesson, but the reason I'm bringing you is like you were an example of like someone we didn't know that we needed immediately, because you and I got on the podcast to talk about the acquisition on the Recruitment Flex. We really hit it off, and I was really impressed by how much you knew about the industry, the connections you had, and also just like, I don't know, it was just natural. It was easy, right? Like it wasn't like, and obviously you have a lot of history in sales as well at Workopolis, or the way I used to say it, Workopolis, and Indeed. And so I was like, when we acquired CareerBeacon, I wanted to have someone to help manage the sales team, but also implement more sophisticated processes, industry subject matter expertise, all things that I felt CareerBeacon needed if it was going to go from what it was known as for the last 20 years to where we wanted to take it. So there was you, and then there was other positions that were like, hey, like, oh yeah, we should hire this role. And so, we should add another person here, and we should add. So we quickly went from 4 to 20 or 21, like you said, within a few weeks, few months, which seemed manageable because like you're thinking, okay, well, revenues can support it.
Yeah.
But what we don't realize is as soon as you kind of go that quickly, especially in this instance, we're essentially merging 3 cultures.
Yeah.
Like work cultures, right? We're merging the alongside work culture that's been around for, at that point, probably about 8 years. 7-8 years, only 4, but still. And then you bring in the team that's coming in from CareerBeacon, and then you're also bringing in new people that are kind of like in the mix of. And so that's the part I think, like if I look back, like that's the part that I think I underestimated. I figured, you know what, it's still at the end of the day, at the core, it's still alongside, it's still startup culture, it's still. And I think there was some things there that I wasn't ready for.
Well, it was, I think anytime you're scaling a company like 3 times, there's going to be an amount of chaos. And I think it's really good if you're starting to hire, you're putting your job ads out there, and you're sourcing people to really figure out what the culture that you want, and be very clear as well that what's going to suck, because you don't want to be putting the same message as General Motors would do or anything. Like it's going to be different. Like there's going to be chaos. There's going to be uncertainty. There's going to be tough days. There's going to be days that you're going to wonder, hey, are we going to make payroll? Like all of these things are, as an employee, you got to know what you're getting yourself into. And for a lot of folks, it's not for them, and that's okay, right? We'd rather not go through the process. They get hired 6 months in and they're like, oh, I'm not ready for this. I'm not built. I'm built for a larger company. So I think a piece of advice here, as far as for anyone listening, is be very clear. And even if it's not rosy, like, just be truthful. Like, what are the true behaviors that happen in a day, right? Like, is it a party hard, play hard type culture? Say it, right? Is it a place that we don't expect you to work more than 9 to 5 and you go home and you take care of what you need to? But I think for a startup like you, that's pretty clear. Even talking to you, I know you didn't have job ads, but like, I knew there was going to be a level of chaos here because you're acquiring a company. You knew the industry because you were in it alongside. But like, job board space is a little bit of a different place, two-side marketplace. You're adding all of these and you're building a lot of people. It's like, yeah, I knew there was going to be chaos. And I think pretty much everyone else. But I was always curious about the folks that came from CareerBeacon, owned by JDI, which is one of the biggest companies in Canada, and coming to a startup culture, right? That's always, it's fascinating to see that happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so first of all, you're right as far as like seeing the, the chaos. That's why we hired you, because you're clearly so brilliant and understand everything that, is going on in the space. And so you knew, I know that you knew, because you warned me a few times of some of the challenges of going to the job, the job board space, the dual-sided market space. And, but I'm kind of like, when someone tells me I can't do something, I'm kind of the opposite. So if you need me to get something done, just tell me I can't do it.
Okay.
So
I'm taking that. I'm writing that down as notes. There's a bunch of stuff. Be like, oh, you can't do that, Yves.
Yeah, I bet you can't. My wife sometimes. I bet you can't do the laundry right now.
Yves, I bet you can't give me a raise. I bet you that you just can't get that done.
Yeah, no, but I've changed. I've changed as of this last moment here. As of like 30 seconds ago. Yeah. No, so I think, like, without isolating necessarily like just folks who came over from CareerBeacon in this conversation, I think startups in general, like, it seems appealing. It seems sexy from an outside, lens. And we've had people before, like, because we always had like a cool place to work at. Like, even we always invested in creating a really good environment for people to enjoy. Like, our previous space, was very like chill, laid back, like open concepts, couches for meetings, like ping pong tables. So a lot of, it's not something, especially in Moncton, New Brunswick, it's not a very common kind of setting. Yeah. And we had a lot of people would just drop by, be like, oh, I would love to work here. Like what, is there anything? And a couple of times we took people up on those offers, like, people who really seemed to be very, very excited and passionate about wanting to be part of the team, to quickly realize that they wasn't for them, right? Just a learning curve and just the pace of how things. So that is there's not even pros and cons. That's just a reality of, like, yes, the startup gives you certain benefits that you don't get, but there's also certain expectations that you don't have at other organizations. Yeah. So I think, like, there's still, some challenges there on that front today. Like, it's a very, like, even our, like, if many people on a team were to go to other startups or other fast growth company, I think you would realize that from a pace perspective, like, we're moving faster than an average company, but we're still not moving like at certain pace, breakneck pace that certain organizations are. And I'm not saying that one's better than the other. But it's not for everyone. That's what it comes down to. The main difference, I would say, with startups versus a company is, one, a lot of times you own a bit of a piece of it.
Yeah.
But oftentimes as well, like, when you have something you're trying to solve, like, it doesn't turn off at 5 p.m. Like, you don't go home, and it's not just a CEO, it's a lot of people in the team who, like, it's not me saying, hey, you need to work overtime and solve this problem. But if people are invested in the company and the team and the problems that we're trying to solve, the culture of startups is really like people that are really passionate about solving pain points. And so they're still thinking about it. They're still reading on things. They're still trying to like come up with solutions at night so that they can come back to work the next day and not start their start their day with some things to try out or solutions to whatever blockers they have. Right. I think that's the biggest difference.
That's it for our first episode. Thank you so much for joining us, and make sure you hit the subscribe button. And until the next time, au revoir.